Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, gentlemen, and happy Tuesday.
All right, well, I've got to pick on you guys a little bit. Just before we went onto the podcast, I was trying to say a quote from, I don't know, was Transformers or something like that, and I got it totally wrong. And in the little chat window, Tommy continued to ridicule me, and Seth was like, "It is Transformers. You got it all wrong." So
You're like, as they say, Cybertron says, "Let's roll."
I got it all. It was all wrong. It was all wrong.
All not right.
It was all not right. I was trying to say, let's start the podcast, and I was trying to go like, Autobots roll out or whatever. That's what the phrase is. When you, dude, I loved watching Transformers.
Those were my Saturday mornings.
Oh man, that was the best show.
The
old ones were great.
Movies.
When the truck would drive down the road and it's the same scene over and over again. It's the same thing with the Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo runs and it's the same scene 6 times and it's just the song over and over. Man, it was like, I love that stuff. Scooby-Doo and Transformers were like my thing. I also like to quit a bit of Care Bears.
Care Bears?
Care Bear stare.
I'm getting a bit of nostalgia lately because all of a sudden my daughter was watching a show on her tablet and it was Garfield.
Garfield.
And I was like, when I was your age, like Garfield cartoons had started
party. Yeah.
I didn't watch much Garfield.
Garfield and Friends.
Oh,
obviously.
I missed that one.
Hey Arnold guy.
Hey Arnold.
Hey Arnold.
I just remember the girl with the yellow hair that went straight out sideways.
Yeah. What was her name? Helga.
Yeah, sure.
And she called him Football Head.
Awesome. All right, enough of the memories. Today's topic here is quite a pointed one. Tommy was saying this is not a very Christmassy article. This was more of a, it has a dark vibe to it, maybe potentially more of a Halloween. Well, at least the artwork in the very beginning. It's called The Rise of the Notebook Engineer. Someone sent this to me and said, "Hey, this would be a great topic. You guys should talk about this one." And I was like, "Okay, let's tease this out of here a bit." And this is 100% right. So today we're going to discuss about the rise of the notebook engineer, and just kind of unpack what this means. I have a lot of points that I think I disagree with in this article, but there are also valid points in here as well. So I don't know how we grapple with this one. This is going to be an interesting topic to kind of unpack what's going on here. The article will be in the description of the video, and it's also in the chat window as well if you're following along this morning. Anyways, let's just do some regular announcements here. Tommy, we haven't announced our news article here. Source control integration for the SQL database in Microsoft Fabric. You know how I've talked about this in the past? I've said, well, I say words that people don't understand. If I said that sentence to normal people, 90% of them would be like, "What are you talking about?" Tommy, what are we talking about?
What's an icebreaker? So.
What an icebreaker for this? This is a good holiday party topic. Start with this one when you go to your holiday parties this year. What's this talking about?
And I think this is going to be some of the last news we get from the Microsoft team. They're already putting out articles saying holiday recap, but yeah, we now have before. I mean, it's private preview. I believe I didn't even check that, but
of course it's in preview.
SQL databases, Fabric databases have source control, and it looks like it's pretty full-fledged in terms of the ability to branch out to new workspace, to do all your commits, to version control, everything you'd expect from what is available in source control and Fabric now is available with the Fabric databases. Obviously, there's going to be some limitations, but I mean, they did not hold back in terms of getting that out the door, in terms of the CI/CD capabilities, getting started. I mean, it's pretty neat. There's actually a Microsoft Build SQL project environment that you can actually do utilizing command line or CLI commands or your terminal commands. So they kind of went full-fledged here, way more than our data flows. But I think they understood too, if you're building, and I'm saying this with, I understand there's our trepidations with some of the words I'm about to say, understanding how important our version control is, they are understanding that a SQL database is going to be a core part of what I think a lot of people are planning to do.
I agree with your point, Tommy, and I will definitely echo the idea of, wow, other teams in Microsoft, take note how quickly the tool was released and how quickly CI/CD and Git was supported right behind it. But I think we could give the SQL team, I think, a bit of a pass here as well. I mean, if you think about what SQL's been doing, SQL doesn't. I mean, they've been building this stuff with Git integration inside Azure like a long time. So like Git integration for SQL databases is not a new thing. It's been around for a while. So it's more like incorporating something we already own and know how to work with, as opposed to data flows really had no concept of a Git integration experience. So that is quite, I think, an advantage for the SQL database team. One thing I will point out here that I really like about this one, there's two options here. You can commit to source control, which means you create the database and you can commit, inherit the Fabric database, commit the items into the Git integration, update from source control. I think this is going to be quite impactful. So you can make changes directly into the repo, and then it will pull its changes in, add a new constraint, change the table definition. This would be great to have these other experiences where you can update things directly from the Git control. So I think that's a very useful feature, one that I'm looking forward to using. Seth, you being the SQL guy on the crew here, from SQL Land, what's your what's your
Land?
SQL
From
Land.
SQL Land.
Yeah,
From past tense.
Yes,
I still play, still dabble.
exactly. So what are your thoughts on SQL things? What kind of, are there any major milestones or nuggets that you need to have SQL do that you are hoping that it will continue to, as they bring that SQL experience directly into Fabric?
I don't think anything's left off that I'm aware of, right? Like it's not like you're pushing the bounds, exponentially outside of some of the just rudimentary things that we can schedule a job, we can execute store procedures, we can, build the things we need to do for data engineering. So I haven't noticed anything that's just like a complete miss right off the rip.
One thing I will just kind of point out here, and this is not a pain point yet. I don't know if this is automatable yet. I'm hoping that we can get there. One thing I was looking for, I was researching. I didn't like. I'm learning. I'm not a SQL developer, so these are things that I'm stepping into a bit more. Have you heard about the backpack files that come out of SQL? So if you do a backup of a SQL database, you get these things called backpack files. And apparently, there's like an already
BKP files.
Yeah, is that BACPAC?
I mean, it's a backup file. But
it's a backup file, but already says backpack, right? It's kind of fun name. I think the name is kind of fun. Oh, whatever. The backup file. So there's the backup file that you would use to go restore your database, right? So you take a backup of the file. There's an automated way that you can turn on a 7-day backup of the SQL database, and it'll just store backups for your database, and you can restore back into the SQL database, which I thought was really interesting. I like that idea of having a backup feature already built into the system. My challenge was sometimes companies have a SQL server and they're only willing to give you a backup file of their data from the third-party system, whatever that may be. And it would be really nice if I could store my backup files inside a lakehouse. And I thought to myself, why doesn't the SQL server actually just have an entire, doesn't matter how many days you back it up. If I have the lakehouse and it's part of my Fabric environment, why not let me just spool up a folder for SQL backup files, go to my SQL environment, point to this is the folder in this lakehouse where I want to store my backups, and tell it how many days do I want? 30, 60, 90, 100? It shouldn't matter. I should be able to add backup files there and then restore from those backup files directly on the SQL server. I just feel like that would have been like an experience that I would like to see in the tool. Maybe it'll get there. I'm not sure, but I feel like I think we still have to sift out, like when you bring in these new tools into Fabric, there's this experience of okay, we have SQL, we now have Fabric. There's probably new features that should exist because the two tools are so uniquely different now.
And I think this is the give and take of having all these tools readily available by a push of a button. We don't have the full customization that you normally have if you're doing it in another environment, where you could do that pretty easily, but you also have to have a lot of skill in the back end. All the tools, notebooks, the SQL databases now, they're not lacking necessarily full-fledged features, but we don't have the same customization that you would normally have available.
Yes.
Like with SQL databases, yes, there's users and roles, or there's roles that I can create, but still everything's through Active Directory. I can't create a basic user and have someone log in that way. It has to be through Microsoft Entra,
Yes.
or Active Directory. So I think a lot of these tools, we're just going to have to deal right now with 98% of what most people are trying to achieve is available in these products. But that extra customization that you would normally do, had you been that life in that past, is just not going to be there now or maybe in the future. So
yeah, I agree. I want to pivot here just slightly a bit here. One thing I just want to point out, there's an event coming up here recently. I'll see if I can get the link here very quickly as we talk about this one. There's the Milwaukee user group is going to meet. We're gonna fire things up. We have a meeting this Friday at the Milwaukee user group. So if you are in the Milwaukee area or you're listening from the Milwaukee area, we're gonna do a Friday user group for Power BI and Fabric. We're going to go over DAX Query View. So we're going to spend some time in DAX Query View, writing some formulas, exploring where you can see it, do some things in the service, do some things in desktop. Just a quick overview of what you can do there. We might explore some of the new info functions as well. So there's some new info functions to automatically document your model. We'll go through those as well and point out a couple things. So just want to call that out. I will go get the meetup item here, and we'll put that link in the chat window if you want to join. We will be at Milwaukee Tool. We'll be the host of our event this year. So
is it hybrid, or are we just doing it in person?
We're going to try to do hybrid. I'm going to try and drop in a link, do a little bit of video for just the tutorial portion of it. If it doesn't go well, we'll just ditch the live portion, and we'll ditch the online portion, and we'll just do live. So we're going to attempt to do both. We'll see how well we go. Again, it depends on like good, strong internet and all the other things that come along with a hybrid event. But we'll do the best we can to broadcast as best we can into the internets. If nothing else, maybe I'll record it and catch it back later on. Anyways, that being said, I will go grab the link for the event. If you want to join us, we'd love to have more people joining the event. Please make sure you sign up if you are going to come, just because we need to know a count of people, and we need to let the people at the front desk know who you are and how many people are going to show up. All right. That being said, I don't have any other ones. I have one more item here. Do we have a little bit more time for another topic?
Sure.
Okay.
Always time.
All right. So people are very excited about the SQL Analytics endpoint and Lakehouse, and people are now, I believe, building a lot more things inside the Power BI ecosystem. One thing that I have found or discovered as I've been working on the system is the SQL Analytics endpoint does not refresh as fast as the data you put into the Lakehouse. So let me describe. If you have a notebook and your notebook is writing new tables or updating existing tables in your Lakehouse, those tables are getting a new definition JSON file. There's a file that describes the Parquet tables, the Delta tables, and then that file can be read by other tools. So desktop or SQL Analytics endpoint, those read those definition files to go find the latest version of a table. So over time, I'm writing data to a table version 1, version 2, version 3. What happens is there's a slight delay. I don't know what the delay is. I've seen it range anywhere between 5 minutes to like an hour, depending on the queue of how busy things are, maybe in Fabric. But the tables created from the Lakehouse are versioned higher than what the SQL Analytics endpoint observes from the table. I don't know what's going on there, but apparently there's a hack that you can run a SQL Analytic refresh or a resync of the SQL table looking at the data table. So I believe there's an API eventually coming that might help us out with this, or we need an API to help us out with this. But for now, just be aware, if you're writing data into the Lakehouse and you're expecting like a very fast turnaround time from the table's been written and the SQL Analytics endpoint is immediately able to read that data, there is a bit of a lag between the version of the Delta table and the version that the SQL Analytics endpoint is reading. So just be aware of that.
Curious, is that affecting is it a cache, or is it also affecting like Direct Lake? Like if I were to pull data into a Power BI model?
Everything.
Everything.
The SQL. So my understanding is, and what I've been doing some testing around is, when the SQL Analytics endpoint is trying to talk to the Delta table, there's a stored definition of what version that table is on. The SQL Analytics endpoint is not updating as fast as the actual Delta table is updating. So there's a little bit of a lag or lead time. What I have found to work around this was, if you're going to read data from the Lakehouse, and you need it to be like a fast, like I'm going to write the table and then I'm going to immediately read the table again, do it inside a notebook because notebooks obey that time frame and will immediately read the most recent version of that data with no lag or no lead time. So just FYI about that, I think this solution is going to be fixed. I'm trying to put my finger on someone had a hack. There's like you can run a SQL Analytics command using like a command to actually like figure out how to
Go
make
get
it
the latest.
refresh, but just refresh itself. So it's almost like the same thing with like a semantic model. You want the semantic model to reframe, go point to the latest data, reframe the data, go get the most recent version. That's what we want for SQL Analytics endpoint. And it's not quite there yet. And I've had this happen on multiple customers where we're trying to read data and write it quickly into the lakehouse, and the SQL Analytics endpoint is behind what the actual version of the table is, which kind of breaks your process sometimes. So just be aware of this. I think it's getting worked out. I think it'll be solved, but it's not super fluid at this point.
The way you're describing things is, it sounds like they just have it on a job on the back end.
Exactly right. Yes, that's my understanding. It sounds like there's a job running through, and hey, I'm just going to scan through these tables, figure out which ones are new. Okay, let's just refresh those data sets.
Speaking of opportunities for real time.
Okay.
I mean, maybe you put it in your own system.
Put in your own system.
I was saying like the SQL Analytics endpoint, real time to the data that's being written in other places.
Just
like
loop it.
There's an opportunity for real time.
There you go.
That's what they're trying to. That's what the whole real time buzz has been about, anyways. For your analytics endpoint.
Yeah. And to be clear, this is, I mean, what we're doing is we're doing like batch loading, right? We're doing like a single, like kick off a job, do a bunch of things, and at the end of those things, have something accomplished with a final table, right? These are things that are not happening like at midnight. They're like happening multiple times throughout the day. And if you're relying upon that SQL Analytics endpoint to have the most recent view of a lakehouse table, there's going to be a bit of a delay there. So just plan accordingly. That's something I've got myself stuck on, and we've had to like re-engineer around it by using more notebooks and things as well. So just FYI about that. That's kind of like my news from the street here. There's probably going to be more topics around this one as it gets resolved in the future. Anyways, enough of that. Anything else for news or beat from the streets that we want to talk about?
That's pretty good.
All right.
For December? Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, to your point, Tommy, usually by this time in other years, the what is being developed slows down substantially. There's not been a lot of slowdown, and I'm actually kind of happy for a Christmas break through December and January. Maybe I can catch up a little bit and figure out what the heck has been developing so far. There's so many things coming out now. It's almost overwhelming to keep up with everything. All right. Well, that being said, let's jump into our main topic. The rise of the notebook engineer. Here's our link for today, our topic for today. We'll jump into that one directly. All right, Tommy, you read a little bit of the article. Give us maybe a bit of an overview of where we go, and maybe we can dive into the article, specifically some areas here. It's a heated article.
This is, I mean, there are calls to Spartacus. There are calls to banding together as a culture here. There's no holds back here. So the article we're talking about is by Daniel Beach, and it's really about the criticism of notebook usage and the amount of usage there is being used in production life cycles, being able to create it so easily. Interestingly enough, there's no mention here of Fabric. This is really more mentioning just a Databricks environment, but obviously, I think this is even more paramount with what can be created in Fabric. And we're really just dealing with the calls to, we have to have a better system rather than just notebook creation, whether it's a skill challenge or the lack thereof, whether it's the technology challenge or vendors. And I don't know, there's a few places, like I said, there are no holding back in terms of Daniel's opinions here. Let's take this from the Fabric point of view, where notebook creation is easier than ever. It is maybe one of the easiest things to do in Fabric, available in a lakehouse, available in a SQL data, or actually not a SQL database yet, but available in a lakehouse, available in a warehouse to bring data into Fabric through the notebook. And again, Mike, your big calling card has been, well, a lot of people are going to transition to the notebook.
Yes.
And a lot of people are going to migrate from the Power Query side of things into the notebook. But there's a challenge here. And I think that's probably the good place to start. Is there's obviously a point of contention that's happening, and I assume it's more than just Daniel here in terms of the ability to use notebooks and more importantly, use them in a production environment. So let's start there.
Yeah, so this is an interesting article. Where I'm coming from is more of that business user area, right? So I'm looking at this lens of this article as I have been a business user. I'm stepping into data engineering as I'm typically used to Excel. Haven't been given a lot of tools. I use what I can to make things work, right? Maybe I'm doing Access, maybe I'm doing Excel, right? For me, the business person, when I started this, I thought, man, Power Query is the best thing ever. I'm going to use Power Query all day long. This is great. Helps me get stuff done. I can engineer what I want. I can automate. For me, the aha moment was everything can be automated. This article is almost ripping apart the idea of like, okay, once you get yourself to data flows, and then once you get from data flows into like notebooks, everyone just sits in notebooks and they're just building lots of data engineering things. And my gripe with this article a little bit is, this is one of my pet peeves here, is he talks a lot about life cycles, life cycle management. How do you get it? I could do the same thing a notebook does 10 times more efficient, and I could do it writing my normal data engineering code, whatever that may be. But he doesn't really allude to, well, what tools are you using to do data engineering? I felt like there was a whole gap here. He was very much ragging on the notebook engineer, but he wasn't giving a comparable, like, what is the expected tooling for a data engineer to use to produce these results of shaping and transforming and moving around data? And so to me, it was like, okay, I understand your point. You're ragging on the notebook engineer, and everyone thinks they're now a data engineer because they know how to run a notebook. But what is the equivalent tool that you should be using as a data engineer? What are those tools? And I didn't really see anything from the article that gave any alternatives. So I felt like he was kind of calling the pot black here a bit. Don't do notebooks. Notebook engineering is not the right way to go. And then no response to what should you be using.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like general areas of opportunity in the article, I would agree. The same thing. I would have liked to have seen it. It was a lot of rant against notebooks, and I thought it was a little lackluster in providing alternative solutions of saying like, hey, like,
yes,
here are some tool sets that you should be using outside of just a general like broad strokes of software engineering principles or best practices or things that you should be doing, right?
Yep.
And we can all rally around like, and maybe it's the structure of that itself that he's pinning or pitting against notebooks, where we've had tons of conversations like how do you create a CI/CD pipeline? How do you do version control? How do you standardize your process? And it's kind of plug and play with notebooks versus some of the more fundamental approaches of using different tool sets that allow for a very rigid deployment and checks and balances and testing and all the things that produce an expected outcome in a repeated way, right?
Yeah.
You're reusing functions and objects and different things, right? I could argue you could do the same thing in notebooks, right? Like you can reuse objects in notebooks and like whatever.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, there's a little dissonance in there just from the standpoint that I don't understand. I think he's coming from that realm of like very rigid structured things that are deployed against more of the Wild West of notebooks. And it's like, like even what we're talking about with the intro.
Yeah.
Fabric is introducing these things and like you can start to utilize them and whatever, but it's not, hey, you're going to start here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And if it speaks more of like pure data engineering practices versus where I think we find ourselves, and he points it out, where you're more of the data developer, right? Like you cross these boundaries, and yeah, I mean, with these new tool sets, organizations are 100% in the realm of get it done.
Yep.
Right. And I think that fundamentally also changes with the size of data, right? Like when you're in big data systems like Databricks or like Fabric even, right? Like the volumes of data that you're interacting with, that's where I would have been like, okay, I would love to see what alternatives there are that you're using in this local pipeline to push things, or what direction is there outside of notebooks if you're such a if you have such a strong opinion on not liking them.
And I'm going to take a slight step back because, Mike, something that you mentioned in the beginning initially that I think we're going to have the internal argument on is just because you're coming from the business side of things, you said Excel or Access, and now I'm creating notebooks. Hey, Mom, I'm an engineer. That's probably not necessarily the case. And
true.
Again, I'm going to forever right now, I think I'm going to have the internal argument with you that to take someone from the business and then to put them in a Python environment or even a SQL environment in a notebook is still difficult more than the user interfaces available in Power Query, or heck, even in a pipeline that at least has a user interface rather than a language. But now there's another introduction here outside of the skill barrier to get into notebooks is the process side, right? One of the biggest things that we've dealt with poor Power BI development was the poor, to your point, scaling or automation of reports and models, where there's so much overlap of the data there. And I think we're going to see so much more of this not fruition, but we're going to see so much more of this buildup of gunk in Fabric, because you're going to deal with, not only are you going to have lack of good code in notebooks in Fabric. And again, I'm taking this from a Fabric point of view, but we're going to see a lot of poor notebook naming, a lot of overlap in, I think, the notebook creation, and these people who are now saying they're engineers or tasked with engineering jobs because Fabric exists without the proper knowledge of the process nor the skill level. And I think that's just saying if you can create notebooks right now, if you actually have some skill in at least having that knowledge, which I think is we're still really going to lack. Again, taking from the normal Power BI or Fabric user, not saying from someone with your background or someone with a background in Python or in notebook creation.
I mean, I guess I agree with you on some degrees, but I also feel like in this information age, as where we are right now, there's a number of free classes, educational things, and I keep wanting to go back to, like, I understand your point, Tommy, but I'm going back to this regular thought in my head that is Microsoft is continually democratizing, bringing to everyone the ability to do data engineering at some level. You may hold a tighter rein on what data engineering that term means, but regardless, Microsoft is expecting, or the language they're using is that data is part of your business, and anyone can shape it, transform it, and get it ready to go into reporting. I think this is a monumental shift as to where we've been, where most of those keys to that type of like the tooling, what you had to pay for. I mean, if I think about what happened before Fabric, we had to go into Azure, spin up various tools, know how all the tools work together. There was a lot more configuration, right? I think Microsoft has taken the right approach here. And I don't know if you guys saw it, but there's an email, I guess, sent out to everyone from, it's like an advertising thing for the Microsoft Fabric conference in Las Vegas. Did you guys see that email come out? They're doing the Microsoft Fabric conference inside, I think it's inside the T-Mobile Arena, which is a huge building in Las Vegas. So the Microsoft Fabrics community is taking over the T-Mobile Arena out in Las Vegas. It's huge. Apparently, that place seats 20,000 people, and they're pushing for like a really big event. They're excited about this. Like, I mean, I think what the message here is, Microsoft is here to play in the data game. We are building this incredible new platform that everyone can get their hands on. And so they're not just tackling to this guy's article point, right? We're not just tackling the people that are only doing the data engineering in articles. We're going after everyone. Everyone's going to be able to leverage data at some degree. And I think this is really interesting. And that's what I'm trying to unpack here. I agree that if you have just a brand new notebook engineer, yeah, you're probably not going to get the most efficient thing. And there's a lot of other considerations I'd like to think through, which is, I think, where the community needs to step up here a bit and give some more information about which notebook experience is the fastest. We've been hearing now about Polars and what's the other one? DuckDB. These are two pure Python related languages, and now we have Python notebooks. So we now have a Spark-based notebook, we now have a Python-based notebook, and we have a T-SQL-based notebook. All these notebooks execute on top of different compute engines, and now you have to know which engine to use. If you're doing mega big data, probably Spark's your option. But if you're not doing super big data and you're moving just around smaller, medium-sized tables, maybe just the Python would be better and more cheap to run as part of compute units. So maybe this data engineering role is becoming more selective in that notebook experience, because but you say notebooks, it's a huge topic of information. So anyways, those are kind of unpacking my thoughts there around that part of it.
And it's interesting about the creation of notebooks, though, too. One of the things that Daniel says, that, again, not holding back here, if you don't agree with me, meaning you abuse notebooks and encourage others to follow in your wickedness.
Yes,
that's what.
That's me. That's me. This is why I was like, I'm reading this article thinking like he's literally talking
things. Yeah.
He's talking to me right now.
Yeah, and again, the funny thing here is we're not even mentioning Fabric here. So the democratization that you're talking about, I don't know if Daniel even know exists, or even this whole article. If you read this, it's not even coming from a fact like, oh, this is available not just to other engineers. This is available to everyone that you're saying. And this is where I'm really having trouble agreeing. And I've converted to notebooks myself in terms of love the experience. I learned the language. I implement it now, part of the processes and what I do on projects. But that being said, I've also seen myself go through the process, and to try to imagine an organization that did not have this background of people who were, let's say, just doing Power BI, and they're doing models, and even if they were doing it in an advanced version, to now say we're going to go notebook centric, right? That's going to be kind of the main way we store, process, and then output data. We don't have a lot of good practices and articles and governance around that in our world, in the Power BI world, in we'll say the Microsoft world.
Right.
Obviously in Databricks, there are, but for the majority of people who are coming from the Microsoft realm, we don't have governance or best practices or user groups that are revolved around a team around notebooks. And I think that's where, for me, the concern is.
Well, it's where his concern is too, I think.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it comes from a good place, right? Like I think
it does.
I think the structure for a repeatable outcome, right? Mm-hmm. Checks and balances, like the software engineering process has that built and baked in, right? And how much of that is getting skipped when you just use notebooks, right? Like when you have access to all the data, when you can manipulate it, when you're, building your, medallion architecture or all these things in notebooks, how much of those checks and balances are you building into that process? Because it's a manual effort versus and intentional versus working with platforms that force you to do that. And what is the result of that? The result is like bad data sets, reprocessing data. Like there are a number of issues that come out of Databricks or I should say notebook only solutions. But the counterpoint to that, I think, in my mind, is, well, let me finish this thought, and it dovetails, but I think the strategies for in today's day and age dovetail with what Mike was saying, right? Like, just because these tool sets have become wider, more easily adopted by more business folks, that doesn't mean that we like the teams that are responsible for creating the strategy and the implementation of key data structures are not following those pure data engineering rules. They absolutely are.
Yeah.
There may be some things that they're skipping, right? Or if you're only in a notebooks environment, but that coincides with people using these tools to get things done. And to your point, Tommy, I think that's going to create an immense amount of noise in these systems because people have access to things that they do. They have zero knowledge of data engineering principles. Mm-hmm. But is the business getting more value because they have access to it and because they can do the things that they are through this analysis, through these other things. And like Daniel makes an argument that that notebooks are good for analysis. I mean, I think to your point, you're just creating a volume of like garbage in the ecosystem related to naming and things. But I think that's where you need to be diligent about how you build these structures within these new types of environments. And that kind of dovetails into my last point. There's a negativity towards like notebooks, and maybe it's because there fundamentally isn't a structure there, right? I can do whatever I want, kind of thing, and that does have risk to it. But that doesn't mean that every implementation from a data engineering perspective that uses notebooks is a bad one. And I think he kind of plays that a little bit in the article. What he doesn't pay homage to is, even if you follow some software engineering best practices, or you get some of those pieces, because not every software engineering process has them all, you can build the most convoluted, insanely difficult to understand solutions that are, I would argue, worse than what you could have in a notebook, because at least I can clearly understand in that environment where things are going, what the lineage is between things, etc. Whereas in previous architectures that I've seen, like, you're using multiple different tools. You've got to know, like, there's this set of jobs over here, and then there's this thing over here, and then you're doing this tool here, and your deployment process, how good is that? Just because you have one doesn't mean that it's like, oh, it's not deploying all the changes to all the environments. You have to do this one and then that one. And like, how complex is that solution when all we want at the end of the day is to refresh some data, right? So I think there's a balance here. I think he makes some good points. I think some of the challenges we've had around notebooks and, ensuring we have proper CI/CD, or where can we put some of these test cases in, or how do you deliver a repeatable product every time, valid. But it also speaks of like structure, and it's like, yeah, that's not going to save you with bad development.
And totally. And I'm going to give some reasons. I'm going to give some data flows a little more love here, because if Daniel's not going to give the solution here, I think let's talk about the world we live in Fabric. Right now we have pipelines, notebooks, or data flows. Those are really the options to integrate data in. And I don't think I'm missing any major one there, but those are really the three options we have to play in the sandbox. There are still 5 articles on the Microsoft Fabric about notebooks. That's it. 2 of them have to do with VS Code. The other has to do with .NET and C# development in notebooks for an API. That's all. While with data flows Gen 2 and Gen 1, we still have an entire section, I believe over 15 articles devoted to data flow development, both on the skill and process and governance around data flows. Those have been available for a while, and they've continued to update those. So we're still lacking with documentation and a process here. And then 2, not saying notebooks are, to Daniel's point, the devil or something to be frowned upon. But if I'm going to the Fabric development and I'm bringing in a non-skilled or technical team, like a marketing team, right? I'm going to start with the data flow, because I'm imagining it's not a big data system, or it's this incredible influx. I can teach them even the idea of data engineering with a data flow Gen 1. I don't even have to do a Gen 2 on just getting data in, storing it, and how this process works. It can upgrade to a notebook, but I think to this point, and again, from someone who's really enjoying notebooks, it's not always the best case for every situation. We saw pipelines, and they're pretty filled out in terms of what they're available in Fabric, where I don't think that we're lacking too many features and activities in pipelines. Data flows Gen 2, for all the things we've talked about, from beginner to mid skill level, can do a ton of things. From the advanced point of view, notebooks are awesome. But again, you are already coming with the prerequisite that you have the skill. And yes, you can learn. And I totally get that. We have Copilot. We have AI that can do a ton of things. But again, I can think what the end goal is for that team or that user. What the end goal, are they going to be working in notebooks for 40% of their time, 50% of their time, in comparison to just trying to get data in, while there's still two other products, data flows and pipelines with the user interface that can do a ton. Now, we can get into the cost, we can get into I think the process of Fabric, and I think it's a very valid argument. But leaning towards where Daniel's going here, at least in our playground, we still have two very good, suitable products for people who may not have that experience or that worked in that environment before.
I'm going back to, like, my question here is, in this space, right? So let's just take the lens here, right? We know there's a motion that Microsoft is making here, is that data should be engineered, moved, transformed, shaped by anyone, right? That's the experience here. This is something we can all agree upon. This is the direction the market is going. It's going to be going this way more and more. I also think, again, my very big picture brain mind here zooms out to this picture and say, look, the more we get APIs, the more data becomes digitized, the more the world keeps making more data. We're going to need different experiences to then engineer and shape that data. I'm not going to go to a SQL database and try and run Whisper against a SQL database with a bunch of video files in it. I'm just not. Like, it's not what I'm going to do. Right? I mean, if Daniel's talking about data engineering in the traditional sense, and maybe he's thinking like land everything in a SQL data warehouse and then use store procedures and then check them in and all the things, totally understand. You're writing code. Get it. But like, if you take that mindset and put it on top of, okay, we need to adopt a new storage system. I think the challenge for me here is SQL had it in the past, and this is until Fabric kind of showed up. SQL hadn't in the past had the ability to talk to a lakehouse. So we had to like kind of reformulate what these other things could do. And so now we're kind of shifting the mindset here. We're taking the storage and the compute thing, we're splitting it apart. And I think what's happening right now is we're in a place where the new patterns and or standards have not necessarily developed. There's a couple companies, I think, leading the helm here. I think Databricks is setting the pattern for what a medallion architecture is. Microsoft was initially not calling it medallion architecture. Microsoft was not calling it bronze, silver, gold. They were trying to use a different term. They were trying to use some other language here initially when this kind of rolled out. And what we have found is they've fallen back into the standard medallion-like architecture. And I think a lot of people are not actually studying what this means. It's the same things you were doing previously with store procedures and staging and production tables. It may be a little bit more enhanced now, but I think with a little bit of education and reading and classing or studying around this one, I think this is going to be an industry standard where you're going to use notebooks, but as the organization kind of chews on this, as experts unpack notebooks, you're eventually going to get to a point where here are some good patterns you should follow, and that becomes now the standard. So I think we're kind of in this growth stage right now where I see a lot of people trying to get a lot of new notebooks. There's a lot of new compute showing up, and we haven't quite dialed in what are the best practices using this new world. So
yeah,
that's my point.
I agree from a data perspective, right? I think directionally, and Fabric supports this methodology, like the data mesh methodology, right? Like, does standards and a singular process and things coming through the same systems make sense from a central data perspective? Sure.
Yeah.
But that's not the direction that's being pushed, right? Like, it is much more to your point. Can you create a data architecture that is a data mesh where you have access to the APIs? Who owns those different data artifacts? Are we building key infrastructure of data engineering in all areas of business then? Or are we just saying ownership of that data belongs to somebody, and regardless of how we got there, it's the data set that's available to the rest of the organization that's important? Well, I would argue in today's day and age, like, the vast majority of companies are going to be like, literally could care less. You're responsible for delivering a key product. How you get there, I don't care, right? But it's not like every system or every, I would argue the vast majority of companies don't do that, right? A lot of it is centralized. A lot of it is in one or two places, or could be, consolidated for delivery and data access, right? So the data point is an interesting one.
And I know we're getting your time, but I'll kind of conclude with some thoughts here, because I gave a face, Seth, because I was going back through my own experience where they don't care how you get there as long as you get there. Well, let's say I'm on a business intelligence team and I'm the only one doing notebooks.
Yeah.
Well, then that's the same situation where I was the only one doing Power Apps. And when I decided to jump ship, there was a lot of training to teach people Power Apps. And, because I was the only one with that skill. And I did initially go rogue with learning Power Apps. I thought it was a great solution. But again, the knowledge was in one particular person. And maybe it's not the best analogy, because I think obviously notebooks are much more universal, but I think there's a really good point here with, as we really dive into Fabric, some questions to ask ourselves for organizations and governance. Is notebooks a self-service product that we're delivering to the business, or is it more managed? Is this part of some skill or center of excellence that we're now introducing notebooks into? These are questions that I'm really beginning to ask. And as more people and more organizations begin to adopt Fabric, these are questions that are going to become up. Now, I don't necessarily know, just like a lot of things in our world, it depends. And I think there's not going to be a one size fits all. But I think that also, Mike, and I'm going to give the notebooks the last bit of love here, where this would absolutely be something that you're pushing from the notebook experience, if it's available, if you have the right resources on a team to make this I don't want to say a priority, but something that we're going to encourage and really push an organization to do, if the resources, both from a skill and people, are there.
And I think there's also a note here as well, right? Microsoft is incentivizing us to move to notebooks because we've already paid for the compute. And honestly, if we look at like the comparison between data flows and pipelines, data flows, and notebooks, those are the ways I'm getting data in and I'm bringing it to the lake. Those are the three kind of main pipeline pieces. There's going to be more of them in the future. There's going to be more areas where I can then leverage and shape and move data around. That's going to be a thing. But that being said, if I look at those tools, I want to focus, that's the data engineering team. And I think if you put, and again, to this article here, I think where we have a little bit of an out here with notebooks is notebooks has the ability to be a regular part of your data engineering process. You just can't ignore software engineering practices. You can't ignore check in, check out. You can't ignore good quality data quality checking on top of your information. And if you incorporate that into notebooks, I've had notebooks running for years, the same kind of notebook, just clipping along, doing its thing, building stuff. And you learn how to build a robust system. And I'm going to go back to, we're going to end here, so just going to wrap up things here. I think my final thought here is really around measuring your value of what the notebook does to the cost and of either training your people or bringing in other tooling to do the same experience. And I think right now, the way I see it, notebooks add a lot of value, but you do need some, as a business, you need some specific thinking about how am I going to use a notebook? What does it happens when it's going to fail? What happens when new data comes in? So as long as you can kind of really incorporate that data engineering process to the business, at the end of the day, if I have a master product table, that master product table better be update and current every day, no matter what. If we can do that with notebooks, great. If that's less costly than running a Power Query data flow, or it's used in conjunction with a pipeline, great. That's what it should be doing. So I think you find what works for your business and what skills your team has. I definitely am a proponent of, if you're already writing SQL scripts, notebooks won't be too far away from you writing other code just in Python or PySpark. It's not too far away. And I know we now have T-SQL notebooks. So if you really love writing SQL, you can still write that there. Anyways, there's options.
Yeah, I think my final thought is, in all actuality, I, as I'm coming around on this, I think Daniel is having the same conversation we do, which is just a lot around how do we standardize our environment.
Yeah.
The benefit of notebooks is the analysis is so much closer to the implementation, and in data, like we're constantly interrogating data and figuring out what the solution is, and none of, like, whether you choose a notebook or other systems or whatever we have at our disposal, good data architecture and strategy is already and should remain important. Software engineering principles should be kept in mind, but that's a team implementation and an org adopted thing that they're accepting versus just saying that people who use notebooks can't follow those same good practices, albeit like there are organizations that will say, yeah, that's tech debt, that's fine. Give me the value up front, and then it's the team's responsibility to build the repeatability, the security, the things in the back behind the scenes. But I think where we're at, we can produce value to the business so much faster, and the business always wants that. So it's the trade-off between things we know we need to do, versus the value that the business sees.
Awesome. Tom, any final thoughts?
I already said them. We're good.
Okay. We're good. So thank you very much for listening. We know this is an interesting topic. Thank you for your ears. We know you could be doing a lot of other things like reading a book, reading about data science, actually doing real work for once at your business or your company. So we appreciate you spending an hour with us. We hope some of this was gleaning some insight to you. I don't think Notebooks is going away. I think Notebooks is here to stay. I agree with the article. We probably need more rigor around teaching people better patterns in Notebooks. But I don't think it's a reason to shy away from Notebooks at all. I think Microsoft is giving us a great ecosystem that will be super useful, with Notebooks being a very pivotal part of that ecosystem. That being said, we really don't advertise this podcast at all. We would love it if you would just share this with somebody else. If you like this topic or found this interesting, please share it on social media. Let somebody else know you found this topic interesting. We'd love to have more people in the discussion. Thank you, chat, for jumping in and making lots of comments. We also appreciate your comments as well. I've been trying to respond to those and interact as well. So thank you all very much. We appreciate it. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tip/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all Power BI.tip social media channels.
Oh, he did that in one breath.
Nice. I almost tripped. So.
I almost stumbled on the way out. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.